This is a webinar sponsored by the Maine Small Business Development Center, and it is designed for those of you who may be becoming employers for the first time, or perhaps a refresher course for those who haven't had an employee in a while. My name is Tina Oddleifson, and I'm a certified small business advisor with the Maine SBDC. I cover Cumberland and sometimes York County. I sit at the University of Southern Maine, and if any of you need to contact me after this webinar, if you have questions, you're very welcome to do so. You don't need to be in those two counties to do that. And I'm happy to help you out with any kind of information that gets presented here today. For those of you who may not be as familiar with the Maine SBDC, we are an organization that is really here to support the small business ecosystem in the state of Maine. We are federally funded, state funded, and then hosted by the University of Southern Maine. And this program has been around for over 40 years. It's in every state in the country. And here in Maine, we have about 12 full-time advisors. And we support the small business ecosystem by providing no-cost, confidential, one-on-one business advising services is really the core of what we do. But we also have webinars like this one. We have e-courses you can take through our website and a lot more. So really encourage you to join our mailing list and sign up for advising if you need it. And we advise throughout every stage of the journey. So if you're just somebody who's thinking about starting a business or you're ready to exit your business, we are there for the whole journey. As advisors, we are people who I believe almost all of us owned our own small businesses in Maine, and many of us also have business degrees. And we often advise on the topics that you see in front of you, but no question is off limits when it comes to your one-on-one advisor. What we are not are lawyers, accountants, or tax preparers. We are generalists, and we're here to help you understand a lot of topics. But when it comes to needing actual legal advice, actual tax advice, you really need to pay for the professional to give you that information. So just a few details. This webinar is being recorded and it's going to be posted publicly on our YouTube channel. So if you want to turn off your video so that you're not seeing, you can go ahead and do that. You are going to get an emailed copy of these slides as a PDF document. And inside that document, you'll be able to link to many of the many resources I have on this presentation. And as we go along, please put questions in the chat and I will be sure to check that periodically. And we should also have some time at the end to handle any questions then. So we have a lot to cover today. And I guess I want to start out by just saying that becoming an employer for the first time can seem very overwhelming. There is a lot of information to know about. And the purpose of this webinar is really to introduce you to that information. My ideal is that you see this webinar either live or on YouTube, and then you go back and you look through it more closely. You take it in chunks. As I said, it can really seem overwhelming because there's a lot of paperwork and rules and laws that go with being an employer. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't worry. But we will be covering a fair amount of info, including how to register to be an employer in the first place. With state and federal agencies, payroll and payroll taxes, labor and anti-discrimination and worker safety laws you should know about, workers' compensation, required and recommended hiring paperwork, and laws related to keeping employee records. So we're just going to jump in with employer registration. So it's not too terrible. The first thing you need to know about is you need to get yourself an EIN number from the IRS. It's an employer identification number. EIN, sometimes it's referred to as FEIN. Many of you probably have this number already. If you are an LLC, a corporation, a partnership, you would have already needed to get an EIN number. But if you haven't, you just go on over to the IRS website. It's an entirely free service, and there are lots of people on the internet who want to separate you from your money and get that number for you. Do not use them. Make sure that you go to irs.gov to get your number. Once you're there, you're going to need to put in your own social security number or ITIN number. You're going to need to be able to tell the IRS what kind of an entity you are and what your business address is. So pretty painless, you'll get it right then and there. You will also get in the mail an employer tax identification letter. And this is a piece of paper you want to keep forever, because at various times you may need to produce it if you are going for a loan and you don't want to have to go back and get a copy. So once you get your EIN, you can register with all the other agencies in Maine that you need to register with. And the first one is the Maine Department of Revenue. And those of you who may be collecting sales tax already, you may already have a login with the Maine Department of Revenue. But what you're looking for is a withholding account number. And this is the account number that you need when you submit withholding taxes that you've withheld from employee paychecks for income tax purposes and give them to the state of Maine. So if you are a new business, you're going to go to that website, revenue.maine.gov, and scroll down until you see register a new business. If you're already on their system because of sales tax, you'll just use your login. So after that, you're going to head on over to the Maine Department of Labor, and you need to get yourself an employer account number, an EAN. And this used to be known, just to confuse everybody, as an unemployment contribution account number, or UC account number. That was changed. And I will also tell you that the Maine Department of Labor's website is not very intuitive. If you are feeling lost on the website, you are not alone at all. And so what I've done here is there's two videos. The first is a video that helps you understand how to get the employer account number. That is a completely separate process from then creating what's called a Reemploy Me, a Reemploy Maine portal account. It's basically just a portal account for the account you just set up, but it's a completely different place and process. And the reason you want to do that is once you get your number, you'll create this portal account, and that's where you can manage unemployment claims. It's where you can pay your unemployment taxes, which we'll get to in just a moment. It's where you're going to get your annual letter that tells you what your unemployment tax rate is. So you can do lots of things from that one portal. So those are two videos, links to two videos to show you how to do that. The videos themselves are also a little confusing at times, but hopefully that gets you there. Those are the three places where you need to have, you need to go first. And then the last thing to understand about is that Maine has a law that says that whenever you hire someone, rehire someone, or if they leave your business and are terminated, you need to tell the Maine Department of Health and Human Services within 7 days. And there's a fine if you don't do that. And the reason is because that data is matched with child support records and they need to know it very quickly. It's true that they eventually get that information from the Maine Department of Labor, but they need to know right away. And you may be asked to garnish the wages of someone who owes child support. And they will tell you how to do that. And then you should also know that if you are paying contractors and you pay someone $2,500 or more, you also need to report them because the DHHS needs to know that they have received those wages. So that's it. That's the first part of our presentation. It's employer registration. And as I said, it's not too difficult, but if you need help navigating, you're welcome to contact us. So understanding payroll, those of you, this might date me, but if you ever watched the show Friends, there was an episode where Rachel got her first paycheck and wanted to know who FICA was and why he was taking all of her money. And I'm sure that all of you who got your first paycheck probably wanted to know the same thing. What the heck is FICA? So that's a good segue into our discussion about payroll taxes. Sorry, the screen is a little dense, but basically there are 3 types of payroll taxes that you want to know about. And the first are often referred to as FICA taxes. And FICA actually stands for the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, and it's the piece of legislation that mandated these taxes. The FICA taxes, so they'll be referred to as Social Security, Medicare, or FICA taxes. These taxes are paid equally between you as the employer and the employee. And the way it works
is that there's a 12.4% tax rate for Social Security and a 2.9% tax rate for Medicare. This tax is taken on employee wages in a year up to when that person reaches $160,200. That's the limit for 2023. So what happens is you run payroll and you're going to deduct 6.2% from the employee for Social Security and 1.45% for Medicare. And then you withhold that from the employee's paycheck. And then when it's time to send those taxes to the federal government, you are going to match them in equal amounts. You should probably also know that if someone in your business makes over $200,000, there's an additional Medicare tax of 0.9%, but that is paid entirely by the employee. So that's FICA, Social Security, Medicare taxes. The next major tax we often refer to as withholding tax. It refers to income tax withholding. And as all of you know, if you've ever worked anywhere, this tax gets deducted so that the IRS and the state of Maine can get income taxes on a regular basis, and also to protect you so that you don't have a huge bill at the end of the year. These are paid entirely by the employee, but you as the employer pull them out of people's paychecks in order to send them to the state of Maine and the IRS. How much you pull out of someone's paycheck depends on a lot of information. It depends on the wage they're getting, the number of exemptions they claim, their tax status, whether they're married, filing jointly, or an individual. And all of that information is going to come off of a W-4 form, which we will get to in a little bit. There's a federal W-4 and there's a Maine W-4. That information then gets put into tax tables that will tell you how much you need to deduct for that employee. So this is the point where I start to beat the drum about using a payroll service or payroll software. You're going to need to use one or the other. You do not want to do this manually. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So then the final tax is unemployment tax. This is a tax paid entirely by you as the employer. And SUTA and FUTA stand for the State Unemployment Tax Act and the Federal Unemployment Tax Act. And you'll see this tax referred to as, SUTA or FUTA taxes. And the point of this tax is that there is a joint program to help people who have lost jobs through no fault of their own. And that no fault of their own gets examined quite a bit before unemployment taxes are paid. Someone can't just quit a job and then claim unemployment unless they quit that job because of discrimination. And the way it works is it's a joint program. So the state of Maine is going to assign you a tax rate. And that tax rate is going to be anywhere from 0.22% up to a high of 5.69%. And it's taken on the first $12,000 of each employee's wage. So you're going to calculate it as you do payroll up until someone gets to $12,000. And remember, this is all your money. It's not being withheld from anybody's paycheck. If you're a brand new employer in Maine, then you're going to be assigned a rate of 2.19%. That's for 2023. But generally, you're going to get assigned a new rate every year, and that is going to be determined by things like whether you're seasonal, whether you are in a particular industry, and what the history of claims has been against your business. So that tax gets taken out. Then the federal tax kicks in. And there's a federal tax because if a state runs out of money to pay all of its unemployment claims, like after the pandemic, it can draw on this federal trust fund. And that tax rate is 6%. It's taken on the first $7,000 of each employee. But there's a huge caveat here, which is that you get a 5.4% credit towards that 6% if you pay your state unemployment taxes on time. So it's a huge carrot. And essentially your effective rate becomes 0.6% on the first $7,000 of each employee. It's not a lot of money. The only additional thing to know is that does not apply if you live in what's called a credit reduction state. Maine is not a credit reduction state. It is, these are states who have drawn on the federal trust fund and haven't paid it back in 2 years. And so they start limiting the amount of credit that employers can take. So that's payroll taxes. I am just going to check. Okay, great. I'm just going to answer Chris Cole's question, which is for reporting new hires and terminations. If you have a payroll company, will they do that for your business? It's a great question. Some full service payroll companies in Maine will do that for you. If you are using employment software or payroll software, that's often something you need to do, and we'll get to that in just a second. So this is a sample paycheck. You cannot just write a check out of your checkbook and give it to an employee. They need to have an earnings statement that goes along with that check. And I actually have clients who have just written paychecks out of their checkbook, and you really can't do that. You must provide a paycheck along with information about what got taken out of that paycheck. And that can be in paper. If you do paper paychecks, there are certain forms you can use to print these. Or it can be, if you have direct deposit, you can just give someone internet access to their data, and that's okay too. But basically, it needs to cover the pay period. It needs to show the number of hours they worked. If they're an hourly employee, if they're a salaried employee, it needs to show the salary amount. And then it needs to show every tax that got taken out of their paycheck and every other kind of deduction if you have additional benefits like health insurance or a retirement account. When I was an employer, I had 20 or 30 employees at any one time because I owned a hospitality business. And believe me, people looked at these with a magnifying glass every week to make sure that every minute was captured. So, so that's why you need to provide this information. So that's the payroll, that's running payroll. Now you need to deposit the taxes that you collected and the taxes that you owe yourself. And there are schedules that you do this on. For FICA and federal withholding taxes, those are getting paid to the IRS, and the calendar or the schedule is that you will either be on a semi-weekly or a monthly payroll tax payment calendar. Typically, most people are on monthly. You need to be a pretty large employer to be on a semi-weekly schedule, and you're going to pay it through the EFTPS system, which you might be familiar with as an individual. It's the electronic federal taxpayer system. If you are not sure, there's IRS publication 15, which that link will go to, and that will help you determine what kind of a schedule you will be on. You're also going to send in the Maine withholding tax to the Department of Revenue, and that's the money you're taking out of people's paychecks for their income taxes. That is paid semi-weekly or quarterly, and that is going to be paid through the Maine Department of Revenue at those two links. For federal unemployment taxes, those are paid quarterly, but not until you reach $500 in tax liability, which means you owe $500. Because that effective tax rate is pretty low and it's only taken on the first $7,000, it might take you a while to get to $500. And once you do, that's when you start paying quarterly. And that also goes through the EFTPS system. And then finally, Maine unemployment taxes are paid quarterly no matter what, and you're going to pay them through that Reemploy Maine portal account that you set up with the Maine Department of Labor. So that's depositing the money. But now you have to actually file an informational payroll tax return to give the details behind that money. And that's on a slightly different calendar. For FICA and federal withholding taxes, you are going to use IRS Form 941, and that is done quarterly. And if you also annually for the IRS need to produce W-2s for each employee, which I'm sure you all probably know what those are. They summarize your salary and taxes for each individual. A W-3 is kind of a summary page of all of that. And then if you do have subcontractors, you need to submit 1099s annually to the IRS. Maine also has a 941. It's a 941 ME, and that is also done quarterly. And just like the federal government, you have to submit W-2s, W-3s, and 1099s to them as well. These are informational tax returns. For federal unemployment tax, you may pay it quarterly, but you're going to file Form 940 once a year. And for Maine unemployment tax, you're going to actually file that tax form, the Maine UC1, quarterly when you submit the taxes. So this is a lot, right? You know, you're calculating taxes, you're filing, you're producing paychecks, you're depositing taxes, and then you're doing all these forms. So that's why payroll software and payroll services are so important. Absolutely do not do this manually. What level of service you want is going to determine who you want to do your payroll with. The options in the marketplace are that there are several local banks that offer payroll services to their business customers, and that can be an easy way to do it. There are private companies that do this. When I was an employer, I used Paychex, and they had an office in Augusta, and I had one person who was my contact, and she did absolutely everything for me. The only thing I needed to do was submit hours on a weekly basis and tell her information off of the W-4 forms. So and as Chris asked earlier, that this level of service, they will also submit your information to the Department of Health and Human Services. But not everybody needs that level of service. So there are now also a lot of online payroll companies out there, and two popular ones I've seen with our clients are Gusto and OnPay. They're newer to the marketplace. ADP and Paychex are large national companies that have been around for many years, and they also have an online option for you. And then the final option is accounting software add-ons like QuickBooks and Wave. If you use those accounting systems, both of those companies sell payroll services. Everybody will create your paychecks, deposit them into employees' accounts. They will send your payroll taxes to the state of Maine and the IRS. They will file your 940s, your W-2s, your 941s, and many of them also offer benefits information and management and HR services as well. So there's a wide variety of services that you can purchase. And it all depends on things like how much involvement do you want. If you don't want to deal with this at all, then I would get a full service payroll company. If you don't mind inputting data about and setting up each employee, then, and you use a software program like QuickBooks, that can be an advantage because it integrates really well with your accounting system. If you need, you want to do Gusto because the rates are good, and you just need basic payroll, then that can be a good option as well. So it really depends. Just going to check the chat here. Okay, so someone asked how does it work if your employee is a 1099? And my answer to that is that they cannot be an employee and a 1099. An employee is an employee, and a 1099 is a subcontractor. And we are going to get into a discussion about that in much greater detail a little bit later. So we'll talk about that. But generally speaking, with tax forms, you need to submit a 1099 if you pay a subcontractor over $600 in a year, and you do that at the end of the year. And we'll also talk about the paperwork you're going to need to get from them in the first place. A great question that we will get to. Okay, so that's payroll. Not too difficult, but again, the message here is to get payroll software or work with a payroll company. So now we want to talk about labor, anti-discrimination, and workplace safety laws. This is a really big topic. And again, my goal here is really to introduce you to these things so that you can do the additional due diligence that you need to do to make sure you understand these things. On each side of this screen, you're going to see links that go to all kinds of resources that are going to help you understand laws when it comes to being an employer. So again, this is just to introduce you. Don't get too overloaded here, but we're going to start with the Federal Fair Labor's Standard Act. That's the FLSA, and it's kind of the granddaddy of all labor laws. It's a federal law that governs minimum wage and overtime pay laws, child labor, record-keeping requirements. The Equal Pay Act is under the FLSA, which is the law that says you can't pay men and women different rates for the same job. And the Family and Medical Leave Act, which is the law that says you need to protect employees' jobs for 12 weeks if they need to go on medical leave. That applies to employers who have over 50 employees. But as we will see in a moment, Maine has tougher laws that apply to everybody. So it's not like you can get out of these laws. And the way it works too is these laws apply to businesses who are engaged in interstate commerce or have over $500,000 in revenue. And again, once you thought you might not have to conform to federal law, if you buy something on the internet in another state, then you have engaged in interstate commerce. So these laws apply to you. So Maine has labor laws. They are more restrictive than federal laws. For example, the federal overtime pay law is in the 7s, and Maine is now at 14. Well, it's going to be $14.15 starting next year. So different standards, and they are more restrictive than federal law. And you need to follow the law that is the most restrictive. So you need to follow Maine law, and they cover all of these different topics, which I'm not going to talk about these in any detail, but there is a Maine labor law summary on the left-hand side of this page. And I would just encourage you to make sure you understand the laws as they apply to you and the type of work that you're offering people. So the next major area of confusion is worker classification laws, which gets back to the question that was asked earlier about what if I have a 1099 employee. So the first major topic that there does seem to be a lot of confusion out there is whether you have an employee or whether you have a contractor. Those two things don't overlap. It's one or the other. And there is very, very clearly defined definition from the IRS and the Maine Department of Labor when someone is a contractor and when someone is an employee. And the reason for that is typically, or historically, a lot of industries have tried to avoid paying payroll taxes and offering workers' compensation insurance by classifying someone as a contractor. That's illegal. And they're absolutely cracking down on that. I had a hospitality property, a restaurant and an inn, and I had somebody from the Maine Department of Labor come down and go through my records to make sure I had classified people correctly. And thankfully I had an HR background, so I didn't misclassify anyone, but it's really not a very difficult distinction. If you have hired a worker and you are providing the tools for them to do the work, the place for them to do the work, you're telling them when they have to come to work, you're supervising them, then they're an employee. A subcontractor is somebody who's in business for themselves to do that work. And they are the ones that say when they're going to work. You don't supervise them, and they produce a product for you that you certainly have say into that product, but they essentially are in business to do this, and that's the distinction. This has come up as a big issue when it comes to workers' compensation, because that is a law that you need to provide workers' compensation, and we'll get to that in another slide. There's an application for a predetermination of independent contractor status that your workers' comp company may want you to provide to them to prove that someone is not an employee. So that's one big topic under classification laws. The other is whether you are offering an exempt or a non-exempt position to someone, and that gets determined by the job itself. And when we say exempt or non-exempt, it means exempt or non-exempt from federal and state overtime laws where you have to pay people time and a half. And there's also a very clear distinction here. Under federal law and Maine law, it's allowed, someone can be exempt from overtime laws if they are in certain administrative, executive, professional, sales, or IT jobs. You can't just pay someone a salary and say that they're exempt. That's not what determines exemption. It's actually the job itself. And when you do offer someone an exempt position, there's still a minimum wage for that position. For a salaried position in Maine, that's $796.17 a week, which basically accumulates to $41,401, and that's the rate for 2023. That will go up next year to over $42,000. So really important to understand this and classify people correctly. Okay, so federal anti-discrimination laws. There's a lot of laws, and the reason is to protect people in certain classes from discrimination. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Americans with Disability Act, the Equal Pay Act, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, and there's even a Pregnancy Discrimination Act. And these laws at the federal level are administered by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and they apply to employers with 15 or more employees. Again, Maine has tougher laws that everybody has to abide by, but the difference here is if someone makes a complaint against your business for discrimination, if you have 15 or more employees, that's going to get handled by the federal government. So there's some great links on the side of this screen that will take you to more information about the EEOC and all these laws, and it's information specifically for small businesses. What these laws are doing, or they're protecting people against employment discrimination, both employees and job applicants. So this language is directly from the EEOC website. It defines the different protected classes, and it also notes that it also protects people from harassment, and it protects them from a denial of workplace accommodation that they might need because of religious beliefs or a disability, and it protects against retaliation if someone does make a complaint against your business. So this is directly from the EEOC website. Maine has one anti-discrimination law. It's called the Maine Human Rights Act, and it protects people not just in employment, but also when it comes to housing, places of public accommodation, and extension of credit or lending. And that is administered by the Maine Human Rights Commission, and it applies to all Maine employers, no matter what your size is. There are some very specific, unusual exceptions in some situations. I'm not an expert and cannot speak to those, but they do exist. Maine defines protected classes a little bit differently than the federal government. It says it is race, color, ancestry, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, which includes gender identity and gender expression, as well as physical and mental disabilities, religion, age, and quote, other categories in certain contexts, whatever that means. And it, like federal law, it also prohibits retaliation for if someone makes a claim. So that link on the left goes to the Maine Human Rights Act and the Maine Human Rights Commission, where you can learn more about these laws. And then finally, under the legal part of this is the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Act, which is a piece of legislation that says that employers have to provide safe and healthful working conditions. This law covers most private sector employers in the United States, and it is administered by OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Generally speaking, you as an employer need to provide a safe and hazard-free environment for employees. And you need to give them the proper training, you need to communicate safety information to them, and generally protect them from hazardous conditions. And there's a a link for OSHA and OSHA information for small businesses. Maine has something called the Maine Department of Labor Bureau of Labor Standards, and they oversee OSHA as it applies to state government. Basically, you as an employer are going to follow federal OSHA laws. But what Maine does offer to you is a program called Safety Works. It's an outreach program that's designed to help employers reduce accidents. And they provide confidential, free advising. There's no reporting or citations issued. They're there to help you reduce any kind of problems related to safety. So if you are in an industry that may have more safety issues, you definitely want to take a look at Safety Works. So finally, the next thing we want to talk about when it comes to the law are required posters. All of these laws have to actually be posted so that employees can read them. They need to be in a place that they can easily read the laws that pertain to them. So posters are something that you can get for free by downloading them from the Maine Department of Labor. You can get them in multiple languages. You are also, once you register as an employer, you're going to get inundated with solicitations from businesses who want to sell you very large, laminated, all-inclusive posters. And they make it sound like if you don't get one, you're going to go to jail. I've had many people kind of freak out when they get these letters because they can sound kind of intimidating. You do not have to buy from them. You can just download these posters. But I will say that if you have an area that gets dirty or there's a lot of activity in that area where you're going to be posting these, then getting these large laminated posters can actually be worth it and kind of helpful, but you do have to pay for them. Okay, next topic, record retention laws. Each of these laws has requirements when it comes to you as an employer keeping records. So under the Fair Labor Standard Act, you are required to keep payroll information for 3 years and benefits information for 4 years and W-2s for 4 years. My accountant always had me keep my records for 7 years when it came to accounting. So I just kept everything for 7 years. Under the EEOC law, you're required to keep information from a recruitment for a year. So if you post a job in the newspaper, you need to keep a copy of that posting. You want to keep all applications and all notes from interviews for a year. And then you also need to keep personnel information, employee records for a year following termination. And then when it comes to OSHA, a lot of people get really intimidated by OSHA because it has a lot of pretty onerous record keeping requirements. This entirely depends on the industry that you're in and the number of employees you have. Generally speaking, people with less than 10 or less employees in low-risk industries are often exempt from these record-keeping requirements. Once you get into more dangerous industries or you have more employees, you may be required to keep regular records of safety-related topics in your business, like what chemicals you use and where they're stored and what kind of training people have had. You can find out all that information on the OSHA website, but generally speaking, if you're in a really low risk industry, and certainly if you just have a few employees, you would not be subject to OSHA record keeping. Whoops, sorry about that. So next topic, workers' compensation. Workers' compensation is an insurance program that's required in Maine. It's required in most states. And it's basically a program or an insurance policy that pays for medical expenses and lost wages if someone gets hurt when they're working for you. There are some exceptions, and like when you're self-employed, you don't need to have this, and you're the only employee. And there are some opportunities to self-insure your own program. The information and the links on the left are going to give you information about Maine's worker comp law. The cost of insurance is going to depend on the industry that you're in. You're going to get assigned an industry rate, and then that gets applied to the salaries of your employees. And then the cost is also going to be dependent on any historical claims against your business. You know, if people are getting hurt regularly on at your business, then your workers' comp is going to go up. One thing to know about, I didn't know this when I first became an employer, and someone called me up and said I was going to go through an audit, and that really freaked me out. You are going to go through an annual audit by the insurance company. They hire contractors who call you up, and they want you to get a copy of your 941s, and they want to find out if people are part or full-time and what they do in their job. You want to comply with this quickly, because what this may lead to is a refund for you, because the way that it works is you pay a certain amount into the program based on your payroll. And then at the end of the year, they figure out what actually happened in your business, and you may get a refund from what you paid in. I used to get a refund of several $1,000s every year, and it was like a bonus at the end of the year. So, so you want to comply. And then here in Maine, you can buy a policy from MEMIC. It's the Maine Employers Mutual Insurance Company. They are required to give everybody a policy. There's other policies out there in the marketplace, so they're definitely not the only option, but they're certainly the option of last resort, but they often, you know, many employers use MEMIC in Maine. All right, so that was workers' comp. So let's talk about hiring people. I'm just going to go through some common things that you should know about before you hire people. One thing to know, so you've posted a job in the newspaper, let's say, or online through, you know, various online places that you can do that. And then you want to have a job application that people fill out, whether it's online or in paper. One thing you should know is that Maine law prohibits you asking about salary history. So you can't have a line that says, how much did you make in your last job? This used to be really common when I was in HR. Everybody did it, but over time it was determined that this really impacted women, because employers would offer a salary just above what they were making before, and women would take it, whereas men tended to negotiate more. So you can't ask that question anymore, and you can't ask a question that would reveal a person's protected class, including their age. Not on the employment application and not in an interview. You also want to be sure to have job descriptions. These are not required, but it's really good practice to have a job description, because it should outline the duties of what you want somebody to do in this job and what the requirements of the job are. Like, what professional requirements do they have, or are there requirements to lift a certain amount of weight in this job or climb a certain number of stairs. I had an old inn that had super steep stairs, and I put that in the job description that you had to be able to climb those stairs because they were really steep. And some people saw them and said, nope, can't do it. Oftentimes after someone takes a job, it's a good idea to have them sign that job description that they've read it. And then the third thing that is not required, although some states do require this, are offer letters. If you offer a job to someone, you want to outline the terms of that position in an offer letter. And that's going to include things like their wage or their salary amount, typically written in a weekly or in the format of what they would get per hour or per week or per payroll, whether the position is exempt or not exempt from federal overtime laws, whether it's part or full-time, short-term, description of benefits, and then just a reminder that in Maine is an at-will state, which means that you or the employee can terminate the job for any reason. You just want to often remind people of that. And I'm just going to check the chat because there's a question. Yes, Chris, you're absolutely right. Just going back to the MEMIC issue and having workers' comp insurance, you may end up actually having to pay more at the end of the year, depending on what happened in your business. So that is true. I guess I was just lucky. I must have overpaid every year. Thank you for that reminder. Okay, so then there's some required hiring paperwork they need to get, and all the forms are on the left-hand side with links to those forms. The first one is Form I-9, and it's a form from the Department of Homeland Security, and it's used to prove a worker's identity and their eligibility to work in the United States. There's going to be a list of identification that you need to ask people for, and you need to sign that you saw this identification and take down the various numbers associated that with like a driver's license number. I actually took copies of these forms of identification, but I did that knowing that I could keep them safe. It's something that you really do need to keep safe. So if you don't think you can, I wouldn't take copies, but you do need to put down this various certificate numbers. Form W-4 is that one that we talked about, that's where you're getting all the information from the employee that's going to help you figure out how much income tax withholding to take out. And then Maine also has a W-4, it's a W-4ME, and you need to use both of those forms. And then finally, the question about the independent contractor, if you hire an independent contractor, you need to give them Form W-9, and that is a form where they fill out, and it tells you what their social security number is. And I would not ever hire someone without having this form on file, because a lot of people don't want to give you that information because they know that you have to report their income to the IRS, but you are required to do that by law. So you do need to get a W-9. And then additional hiring paperwork, just good practice to have for your employee files, is to have an employee contact form, which includes an emergency contact for someone, and also their permanent mailing address. I was a seasonal employer, and people's addresses were all over the place, and I had to send them W-2s at the end of the year or the beginning of the year. And sometimes the addresses didn't work. So you want to make sure you get permanent addresses. If you are doing direct deposit, you're going to have to get bank information from people, and that's usually a voided check. And that's something that if you use a payroll processing company, they often give you a form to do that. And then you also want to have an employee policy manual. You want to figure out what your policies are going to be around things like paid time off and leave and hours and flexibility, and whether what could result in termination. And there's lots of templates out there that you can find on the internet, and I have templates too, but I always advise that you get legal review, because these are laws that you're touching on, and you want to make sure that your policies are in compliance with laws in the state of Maine and federal law. And I know oftentimes new businesses don't want to spend money on lawyers or accountants, and it could save you a lot of headache in the long run to have somebody review that. So I know that was a lot of paperwork and taxes and laws and insurance and all that stuff. And as I said in the beginning, this is really a starting point for you just to start investigating these topics. But it's just the beginning of being an employer. You really, over time, you're going to learn what it means to be a good employer. But just some rules of thumb: you always want to communicate regularly. Your expectations need to be very clear, but you shouldn't ever assume that people understand what you want. And you want to make sure that you're giving people the training and the tools they need to actually be successful in the job. And also related to communication is to listen to their feedback and their ideas. Don't shut people down. They know a lot about your business after working in it. So it's a really good idea to be listening to them, and then to acknowledge them and show appreciation. Sometimes as small business owners, we get really busy, and it can be really hard to remember to thank people, but it's really important. There's lots of studies that show that that wages are really important, but they're actually what's equally important to people is to know that they're doing a good job and that they feel fulfilled in that. So just keep that in mind. So that is it. There's lots of different ways to connect with us through our website, our YouTube channel. This will be posted on YouTube so that you have access to this information. And as I said, I'm going to send you the slides that will give you all those links. And you can also find us on social media as well. And I'm just going to look. There's a question in the chat. Thank you, Chris, for the feedback. But if anybody has a question, you can either put it in the chat right now, or if you want to unmute yourself and just throw that question out there, I'm happy to answer it the best I can. Hey, Christina, I've got a question for you. Yeah. Hey, Corey. Hey. So I'm at this is maybe more a personal question. I'm at a bit of an impasse. I registered an account with to get an employer account number with the Maine Department of Labor. I did that about 2 weeks ago, and it still shows that the account is being reviewed. Do you know how long that takes? Because that kind of throws a wrench into having the employee start, I think. You know, I don't know the answer to that, but I would encourage you to call them okay. and also send them an email. I don't know why you would be reviewed. So the best thing is to reach out. You know, the agencies in Maine are actually filled with a lot of really good people who tend to answer questions pretty well. So I would do that, because you're right. And that's a really good point. Registering for all of those registrations sometimes can hit snags. I've had clients who have gone onto the IRS website to get their EIN number and then get bumped into a category where they need to do it through the mail for some reason because it needs additional review. So don't try to get all these numbers, you know, a week before you want somebody to start. Thanks. Yeah, good to see you. Anyone else? Oh, when do you file unemployment taxes? So Marguerite, that for the federal government is that is quarterly. When you get to the point of having $500 in tax liability, meaning you've accumulated $500. So if you don't have that in Q1, you're not going to file with the federal government. And in Maine, you want to do, those are done quarterly. And then remember, there's deposit schedules and there's filing schedules, and those two things don't necessarily align. You know, there's the depositing them and sending the money into the agency, and then there's filing these tax forms. And again, would really encourage you to use software. And when you use software as a minimum, it will help you know when that those are going to get filed. And most software programs, even QuickBooks, actually files these forms for you, so you don't have to worry about when they get filed. We have a comment that Maine revenue only takes calls 9 to 12. Okay, thank you for that. Email is another one. I don't know if I've just been lucky, but I've seen to have called them at times where somebody actually picked up the phone. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'm going to send you the slides. You're welcome to reach out to me anytime or sign up for one-on-one advising, and an advisor can help you through these questions and provide you with resources as well. So thank you.